everyone. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are the co-owners of Avaya University. Thanks so much for joining us. In this event, we're talking with incredible fellow experts. We're talking with therapists, psychologists, doctors, best-selling authors, and more, who are here to provide you with tools and strategies to help you ultimately experience greater happiness, peace, and joy in your life. Today, our guest is going to be talking about the lifequake phenomenon, when depression is a mask for lack of soul purpose. I am super excited to dive into this topic. So please, everyone, let's welcome Dr. Toni Galardi. Hi there.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you, and thanks so much for doing this. And I'm going to tell everyone a little bit about you before we get started. So Dr. Toni has been a professional speaker and author for over 20 years on the subject of change mastery, resilience, and discovering your soul purpose to groups as diverse as Xerox, Autodesk, the American Bus and Tourist Convention, and the National Association of Women in Business. Ahead of her time, she designed a holistic, revolutionary model rooted in the neuroscience of mastering change. Her mission through the lifequake repurposing method is to assist organizations and individuals globally in preparing for their next chapter through either a career or business restructuring, or just stopping the chronic pattern of waiting until a major crisis hits. So let's talk about a little bit about you and your journey first. So I know that you were trained as a psychotherapist, and then you have become this career coach. So could you talk a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, well, I think it came from having a lot of careers, actually, all connected to the same thing. It was one degree, one master's degree, and one PhD in psychology, but I parlayed that as my interest in something else became much more apparent. And so I started out as a psychotherapist in private practice. Then I became interested in giving workshops and becoming a speaker. And then I left it all behind. You know, I went through a personal dark night of the soul. And that was when I started actually writing about, because I had been trained what clinical depression looked like. And I knew there was something going on with me that was not clinical depression, but felt like depression. And I went on a journey and discovered shamanism. And there was a way of working through the body and clearing out blockages in the body. So that became the next thing that I became passionate about. And I went through 3 near-death experiences. Because
wow.
Each time I was afraid of making a big change, and I had to be dragged through it. And then that became my work, you know. So everything I think we end up doing comes out of our own life experience, really, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about your story. So what is a lifequake? Obviously, this is like the foundation of your work. So what is a lifequake?
So a lifequake is the awakening of the soul to its next level of evolution. And for most people, that shows up because awakenings can often break up old patterns, and in order for the soul to, and I use the metaphor of the planet because we came from her. She's our mother, and she's in our DNA. And so I use the metaphor of we're like layers around our soul. And there are all these faulty layers. Some come from our family, the religious traditions we may have come from, society's mores about who we're supposed to be. And when the soul decides this is not working for me anymore, these fault lines that are through these layers start to erupt. And just like an earthquake, something happens in your outer life. A spouse walks out on you. You lose your job. You get diagnosed with cancer. There's all kinds of things that can begin the trigger toward your awakening into who you're meant to be.
Awesome. I love it. I love that lifequake. They're saying exactly what it is, right? So talking around this subject of mood disorders, right? Anxiety and depression, how are mood disorders that arise from what you call lifequake different than like chronic mood disorders?
So the kind of anxiety that can come, let's start with anxiety. Okay. The anxiety I started having, I was married and I was in private practice in Orange County, California. And out of the blue, I started having panic attacks. And I had never had a panic attack before. That was not something that was normal for me. And what was happening was the ego, my the way I had defined myself had started to shift and change. And it was withdrawing from the life I had. And that kind of upheaval that was going on inside, the resistance of my ego was so strong that it resulted in this kind of level of anxiety. So it was panic attacks rooted in the body knowing on some level it's time to make a change. And my psyche, my brain, not matching with that body wisdom. So that's one way it shows up. Depression is, what many, I'm not the first one to talk about the dark night of the soul, but so often people will go to see doctors, psychiatrists, and be medicated when what they're going through is a dark night of the soul, which is questioning spiritually about their life. What is the meaning of my life? What is my soul purpose? And it can show up looking like depression. I was trained as a Jungian a psychotherapist, and Jung was a big proponent of astrology. So I started studying astrology. It was one of the things that I do as part of my work. So I can actually see by looking at a client's chart, oh, they're going through a Saturn transit. Saturn transits can cause depression. Pluto transits can cause depression. Uranus transits can cause anxiety. And instead of medicating a person, I work with that individual in terms of how to work with the neurotransmitters through guided visualizations, tools, through the kind of foods and supplements, nutritional supplements that can make a huge difference in stabilizing your neurotransmitters while you're going through this. That's why I have it as a 7-stage model. The first 3 stages of this model are before everything starts to, where you leave behind everything. So it begins very subtly. Boredom is, the most subtle form of depression, by the way. And it's where this whole thing begins.
Yes, that's a really good point. Yes, boredom. So could you dive a little deeper into, I guess, neurotransmitters? So why is that important that you're working with people in neurotransmitters as it relates to anxiety and depression?
Because the neurotransmitters, for example, serotonin, can be very much altered by the fear of change. A person is being called to radically change their life. And we're all feeling this collectively as this evolutionary mandate is speeding up our kind of spiritual, there's an acceleration taking place. And our entire DNA structure is changing. And so it's creating for a lot of people upheaval, anxiety. And once again, somebody who is going through a Uranus transit at the same time is going to experience low levels of serotonin, with this anxiety. So things like I will recommend that, although someone may be accustomed to doing a paleo diet or a keto diet, that this may not be the time for that. That you really need to be eating foods where there is soothing, like oatmeal, for example, in the morning or at night, sweet potatoes, things that actually can increase serotonin. Because that's what anxiety will do. It will lower the serotonin. As it applies to depression, we're looking at, somebody who's going through an experience. And again, as it applies to soul purpose, what's happening is that what you've been doing either is no longer fulfilling you, and it's time to make a change. And so you go into this kind of depression because it's what I call, I know not what. I don't know what's next. And that's terrifying. If I can't do this anymore, and this is what I was trained to do, and this is what I've been paid really well to do, what else can I do? And that's when people come to me, is that, in that state of either anxiety or depression or both at the same time. And so I do work with diet. I do work with the central nervous system. Many of the tools that I give people is to calm their central nervous system.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you expanding further on that. So let's talk a little bit about, your book, The Lifequake Phenomenon, you talk about altruism, right? Giving back, being of service, and how that plays a role in mastering, right? Things like overcoming anxiety and depression. Why is that?
Well, we know from the studies that when the term that I use for being altruistic, because I remember a psychopathology professor when I was at Chapman University in grad school saying there is no such thing as altruism, actually, that it is actually selfish to give back because of how good it feels.
Right.
And so what we know from the studies is that T cells, for example, people who were HIV patients, when they started volunteering, their T cells went up. So we know that it affects the immune system, giving back, that we were wired as a species to give to others, to be community oriented, to want to help. And so the narcissism that has happened, especially in this country, has not served us. It actually feeds addiction. It actually feeds cancer. When people start really again, this is about soul purpose. So when you're giving back, when you're doing for others, your soul is fed, and the world benefits. So when you are in touch with your purpose, you will shift the entire planet.
I love that. Yes, absolutely. And it is so interesting to see where we're at today and how disconnected we've become from one another. And it's interesting doing this series because we have talked a lot about that and how prevalent that is, just how disconnected people feel, and how obviously when we do things like this, when we can connect with each other, like, wow, I mean, it feels so good. It's awesome, right? Like what? So right. Yeah. It's so interesting why we tend to avoid that these days and not go after that connection.
And the truth is, I mean, there's so many, like Huffington Post, New York Times, they're all talking about this decade we're moving into and how critical it is. Our survival, is dependent on us getting beyond being me oriented, and really, being conscious about buying plastic, water bottles and, I mean, the landfills, all of this, our climate, each individual can make a difference just by looking at how does everything I do affect the planet and affect each other, so absolutely. I'm passionate about that.
Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. So you mentioned like briefly that you personally have struggled with, right, anxiety, panic attacks. Is there anything else you can say about that, or have you also struggled with depression in your life?
Yes, but it was always at a time when it was meant for me to change what I was doing, and right. That's when the depression would come in, and really it was more what I call a dark night of the soul. And the way that it would show up is the whole world would start to look very alien. Everything that meant so much to people, like social media and all of that stuff, would start to feel very bizarre and strange to me. And it was because my ego identification with the world was separating and moving me toward my soul. So what I did with that was get very quiet. I listen to my dreams. When I work with my clients and I do, my Zoom classes, I have everyone. I teach people how to remember dreams and then how to deconstruct them and interpret them, because you can get lots of information about what your next step is. I ask before the dream time for answers about the future all the time, and it's very, very useful.
Awesome. So like for our viewers right now who are struggling with anxiety and or depression, and they don't feel like they have a purpose, right? I'm assuming they'd be watching right now because they're like, well, wait, I might feel a little disconnected from my purpose. So what suggestions do you have, or tools, or do you have for people that could connect with that purpose?
And there are a bunch of things on my website as well, just free stuff you can find, either through the blogs, the guided visualizations I put up there. If people sign up, for example, for the newsletter, they will receive a guided visualization that can take you through one of the tools about how to discover your purpose. So, but for this moment, one of the things that I recommend is start observing, where does your energy go up? When we're going through a lifequake, in the early stages of a lifequake, nothing can feel like it's turning you on. It can feel like everything has gone gray. And so, but if you start paying attention and just noticing, there may be things that you have never been attracted to before, or
right.
colors, or movies, or whatever. Trust that. notice what, I mean, like I started watching a television series not too long ago that when it came out on TV originally, it was called The Americans. It was on FX. It was a whole series for 6 seasons. I could not watch this show at that time. Now I'm really drawn in, and it's about the 1980s and these two KGB agents who are sent to America, married to each other, and posing as Americans and have children. So you see the juxtaposition of them going out and on a project, killing someone, coming home and becoming a parent. And it just, but it was like, I started to say, okay, what is that about? I became curious about it. Not like, well, why are you watching these killers on television? But what it showed me was when I started following the breadcrumbs, and this is what I teach my clients, follow the breadcrumbs, was, oh, that's interesting that I'm fascinated by. So I started looking up what was going on in the USSR during the 80s and where they are now, and how we are going to be going through a deconstruction and reconstruction. I believe we're going to start going through that in 2020. Well, you know, the USSR went through a massive, when they deconstructed, it was bread lines, it was bad. And now people are traveling there on vacation, you know? So they went through a revival because they actually started to move toward their mundane astrology highest purpose. And I talk about that in my newsletter, actually. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I'm looking for models for us as Americans to prepare people, you know, for this change that's coming, you know, that although it may be another economic contraction, out of this, there will be a rebirth that will be amazing for our country.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, I love that. It's following the breadcrumbs, starting observing, right, where your energy goes up, just like even the most subtle things. I love that, right? What are you passionate about? What lights you up? All that kind of stuff.
It can be a billboard for a gym. You know, and let's say you've been doing yoga, that's been your thing, or qigong has been your thing because you're on the spiritual path, right? And you start noticing, you know, ads for Gold's Gym. Pay attention to that instead of being in your box about, well, that's not the kind of thing I do. No, like, oh, that's interesting. Staying curious, being curious about what's calling you now, even if it seems out of the box.
Absolutely. So what about you? Like, I mean, you've obviously shared a lot of your passion of what you're up to, and maybe you've kind of already touched on this, but what is your own soul purpose? What have you figured that out to be for you?
You know, it hasn't changed a whole lot. I'm doing a 10-year anniversary release. It's an update of all the neuroscience that I've collected over the past 10 years of the lifequake phenomenon in the spring. And what I'm still passionate about is helping people prepare for change before they hit the wall. You know, most people wait until they as I mentioned earlier, until a massive crisis hits. And so my feeling is, through my classes, through the media that I do, I've been on ABC and Fox, that my passion is that if I can get the one-on-one person to begin to be in touch with their soul purpose before things become a critical mass, then that will ultimately lead to a paradigm shift on the world stage. Right. So that we don't have to wait until our hair is on fire as a humanity, you know, before we make changes.
Why do you think that we resist change so readily?
Because there's a belief that change equals loss. Now, for someone who, you know, we can get into secure attachment here, you know, if you studied that at all. But if someone has been raised where in a family where they were supported to do whatever, you know, their heart's desire was, then they probably have a very solid root chakra that will allow them, you know, that base chakra of security and safety, that would allow them to easily be able to change. Because I've seen that. I've seen people like, oh, I'm bored with that. And then they just go and do something else. But that's not what most people have damaged root chakras. And therefore there is fear because of some childhood experience they had of what change meant. You know, They could have been an Air Force brat and it meant, starting in a new school and it was horrible and they were bullied and whatever, It could be a traumatic divorce, that may have informed that change equals loss. But it's rewiring, and that's what my work is about, rewiring the neurotransmitters and the central nervous system so that change now equals gain, that you feel that in every cell in your body, that I can make changes with a level of expectation of enthusiasm, that I'm going to gain from this. I may not know what this journey is going to take me. It may be a complete unknown as I take a step into the future, but I'm going to come from a place of change equals gain.
Absolutely. Right. It's like I always thought, my background in nutrition, I always remember having this conversation with myself of so many people when we talk about like eliminating things from people's diets, it's like, no, you keep taking stuff away from me as opposed to focusing on adding, right? Yeah. Like focusing on adding more things, and naturally other things will not be eaten as much based on us adding new things, right? It's
no
like,
question. No question.
So
give up sugar, by adding glutamine to their diet, that can help stabilize, or chromium can help stabilize their blood sugar,
Yeah, absolutely. So what about let's say someone's watching right now who is, feeling this loss of purpose, is not sure what they're meant to do, but they can't afford, let's say, private coaching with you. I know you mentioned you have some free things on your website. Any other suggestions for people in that stage?
As it applies to so I can answer that in a couple of different ways. As it applies to working with me, there's also, when I do what's called a soul blueprint session with someone, so in one session, I can look at their natal chart and see where the blockages are, what are some things they can do, in their own life that can really help them move forward, and timing. I can see what the timing of making changes, when is the best time to make certain changes in the next year. So that's a whole kind of way of looking at your contract on planet Earth. As far as individual, by themselves, if somebody has no money for, the lifequake phenomenon in the book, you can probably get it. I think it's $8 on, not paperback. Paperback is probably $12, but on Kindle, I think you can get it for like $8 or something. And that's a 7-stage model. And there's lots of tools in that book. In the offer, there will be the CD that, on and on. And so but as it applies to, if you can't do any of that, you have no budget for anything, then just pay attention to your dreams. Start keeping a record of your dreams. Set an intention before you go to sleep at night. All I want to know is my next step. Show me my next step.
Got it. Awesome. I love that. Thank you. I appreciate actionable things that people can take on, right away as a result of chatting with you. So let's talk a little bit about your offer and your gift, since you mentioned that a moment ago. So there's a couple buttons below this video that lead over to Dr. Toni's website where you can get some free stuff as well as a great offer. So could you tell us about those?
Sure. The free is if you sign up for the newsletter, there's a guided visualization that will definitely help with finding what you're here to do. In the offer, there's my CD, which has 7 different tools on it that will guide you through me taking you into a deep state and giving you tools for finding what you're here to do. There's the book in a downloadable format. I am also teaching a class, which will start in January. That will be, you'll meet with me once a month for 6 months. And then each person will have a purpose partner that they connect with once a week for actionable steps to be accountable for them really moving things forward. If you're feeling stuck in your life right now, this course that starts in January will definitely help start getting you moving forward.
I love that. That's so key. The accountability buddy, the person that you can go do your workout with, but whatever kind of workout that is, mental, physical, whatever. Absolutely. So important. Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And everyone, please, I highly recommend you click those buttons below, explore Dr. Toni's work further. And are there any last insights, anything else we've left out or you want to dive into before we wrap up?
I think the only parting message I would give is that anyone who's feeling lost in their life is to lean back and listen to their higher self, because you came onto this planet at this time when we are going through a major spiritual acceleration for a reason. You are here to contribute to humanity in your particular way for a reason.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing this, Dr. Toni, and taking the time. And I really appreciate your work and everything that you're up to in your soul purpose.
Thank you so much, Andy. It was great being with you.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for tuning in and showing up for yourself today. And we will see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Hey everyone, I just wrapped up another great class with Dr. Toni Galardi. She talked with us about the lifequake phenomenon, when depression is a mask for a lack of soul purpose. So I really hope you found this beneficial. When Toni told me that this was what she wanted to talk about around this topic of overcoming anxiety and depression, I thought it was so key, because obviously if we are not feeling like we have a purpose in life, a destiny, something that we're here to do, that can obviously lead to a lot of depression and anxiety. And I think this was just really, really helpful. So first off, what is a lifequake? She talked about that being the awakening of the soul to the next level of evolution. And she talks about, right, oftentimes we have anxiety and depression if we resist doing that next thing, right? Taking that next step. Whatever that is. Maybe it's a career change. Maybe it's a relationship change. Maybe it's a physical body change. Any number of things that we could resist changing. And I really wanted to know, I'm like, well, why is it that we as humans tend to be, so many of us, so resistant to change? And she talked about that being a belief that there will be a loss, right? So what she does in her work is she helps rewire the brain so that change becomes a gain, no longer a loss, right? A gain in your life. Couple of other things I wanted to take a quick note of were boredom, right? She mentioned that boredom is this, like, one of these first real subtle signs that can lead to depression. And I thought that was really key. So paying attention to, maybe you're not depressed right now, but you are starting to be bored in your life in certain areas, or one more than the other, then this is something to pay attention to, right? So also she talked a little bit about, again, the lifequake phenomenon and how we ultimately are wired to help other people, right? She talked about this role that altruism and being of service plays in helping people overcome anxiety and depression. We are wired to help each other. We are pack animals, right? We are meant to be together in community, and our society has definitely leaned away from that in so many ways and become a much more narcissistic society, which feeds into poor mental health, poor physical health, poor societal health. So just something to keep in mind. And like she said, right, like helping others feels good, right? When you help someone else do something or get something that they want in their life, right? How are you left feeling? I would imagine you're left feeling pretty awesome. So this is just something to keep in mind. If this is not something you're focused on in your life, how can you focus on just little things that might be able to help your neighbor, or, somebody walk across the street, or whatever, in any small way that you can? How can you help others? So my last thing I wanted to mention is, when I asked her about her own struggles with anxiety and depression, and she, just to reiterate this, she did have struggles with this, but it was specifically always at a time that she was meant to change something that she was doing. So just a little food for thought and something to pay attention to in your own life. So are you struggling with anxiety and depression, and does it resonate with you that it has something to do with you are meant to change something that you're doing in your life right now? And ultimately, a big tool that you can use is just starting to watch, right? Start to observe what things in life light you up. Where do you get passionate? What excites you? And then ultimately follow those breadcrumbs to what it is that you're designed to do. So I thought this was really great. I hope you enjoyed it as well, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.